Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are thrilled to have you here this evening. It's going to be a very special evening where we come together as a community to celebrate creativity, connection, and the extraordinary work of an artist who inspires us all. Preston Singletary is here to share his story, his inspirations, and give us a behind-the-scenes look at his artistic practice. This is a rare opportunity to see the passion, skill, and vision that go into the pieces he creates. My name is Megan, and I work in the shops, and I'm super happy to see all of your faces. So after the lecture this evening, we're going to have a book signing right over here. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Preston's latest book, Fusion Notes, he'll be there to personalize it for you. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment and share our land acknowledgement with you. Okay, there we go. Lovely. The Cording Museum of Glass is located upon the unceded seas territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, on which the Onondaga, the Seneca Nation, and the Gayahodino, the Cayuga Nation, are a part. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy precedes the establishment of the museum, New York State, and the United States of America. The museum acknowledges the oppressive history inflicted upon and the continued disposition of the Haudenosaunee people. We honor their ongoing connection to these lands and waters. We ask all who read this acknowledgement to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that connect us all. This is a living land acknowledgement, and we will continue to revise and strengthen it as we continue to learn as an institution and in collaboration with others. And now I'd like to bring my colleague Tammy Landis to the mic. Thank you.
Hi everybody, happy Friday. Good to see you. Hello. Such a treat to have Preston with us. I'm Tammy Landis. I'm the curator of post-war and contemporary glass, and I'm going to speak very briefly because I want to make sure we give all the floor to Preston while he's here. There's so much to share. But few things. Preston Singletary is an internationally recognized artist of Tlingit descent who has been working with the material of glass since 1982. Based in Seattle, his sculptures consider themes of Tlingit mythology, traditional designs, while also using his work as a musician to shape his contemporary perspective of native culture. Preston is also a very talented musician. His awareness of the senses is really honored through his work in so many ways, how he creates his installations and exhibitions. For example, in his traveling exhibition that continues right now, it started in 2018? 2018, it's been traveling, called Preston Singletary, Raven and the Box of Daylight, with nearly 60 works in glass, tells the story of Raven, who in Tlingit culture transformed the world, bringing light to people via the stars, moon, and sun. But that exhibition, what I want to point out is when I experienced it for the first time some years ago, I was just taken in by the multi-sensory experience that Preston fostered so thoughtfully. The music, the sound, the colors, and of course the glass. But the glass was a part of something so much bigger. So what I really love and admire about Preston's work is his full approach to his practice. He doesn't miss a beat. He sees it from all levels, all perspectives, especially, when he brings in his talent of music. And something I think that speaks to this recently, Preston worked with I want to make sure I say it right, the Northwest Ballet in Seattle, and he was a set designer for the classic ballet of Sleeping Beauty. And you should make a note of that and look up some of the images. It is fabulous. It is really exceptional, the work that he was able to put together. So I wanted to just share that bit when I mean he's really thinking about all aspects of what is visual and how we experience life and the senses. So to see it in a set, that was just breathtaking. I mean, I didn't get to see the performances, but the images, amazing. And leafing through Fusion Notes, what an exceptional moment to look at this memoir that he's put together, to just get little bits and pieces of an artist. So I do hope you all get a copy and get to cherish that and continue to celebrate and take some of these bits with you. Preston, welcome to the museum. I know you've been here so many times, but welcome. Come on up. Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you all for being here. The last time I spoke in the museum was 2006. It was when I had made a piece for the Raycow Commission, and it's on display in the upstairs. And so it's kind of it's a daunting task to sort of edit my presentation to a point where I can share, I want to share everything, but we'd be here for a couple hours probably, and that might get a little boring. And so I have to start with this. This was a native scholar who wrote this, and this was one of the biggest inspirations for me. That sort of showed me that Native American art had been excluded from the modern art movement, and yet we are contemporary people. I see my art or my approach to what we do as a kind of a transformational medium. Glass is transforming from a liquid to a solid, and our culture should be also evolving in such a way, changing and reinterpreting the symbols and codes to the land. So this is this was a photo that I found on the internet. It's an unknown ancestor, I believe. I'm kidding, of course. Well, that joke didn't work. Okay. So anyways, yeah. This is my great-grandmother who grew up in Sitka, Alaska, and she is the woman here in the center of the picture, Susie Johnson Bartlett Gubatayo. She lived to be 100 years old. She relocated to Seattle in the 20s, and from that point forward, she was in a traditionally arranged marriage. She was widowed and with 3 children. She remarried a Filipino man and moved to Seattle in 1923. We're from the Killer Whale clan and the Eagle moiety. So all of these connections were all aware. I was aware of all these connections when I was growing up, and this was something, although I grew up in a very urban kind of setting. This is Sitka, Alaska. I didn't take this picture, but I thought it was really beautiful to, kind of showcase Sitka on a beautiful day. So she moved to Seattle, and this is my mother, who my grandmother was also full-blooded Tlingit, and she married a Filipino man, and so my mother is actually half Filipino, half Tlingit. So technically, I'm a Tlinkapino. And so, but I show this picture because I grew up around, my family was very creative. My mother dabbled in all kinds of handicrafts and was very talented with cooking, and she and my father at the time played Delta blues and sang folk songs, and I grew up with that around me. My father was a great outdoorsman. He was actually quite a famous fly fisherman in the Northwest. And we have the same name, so we were always getting mistaken for each other. People would come up with their hands trembling. It was like, I didn't know that you were the fisherman too. And it's like, oh no, that's my father. Calm down. It's all good. But we would get, and then he would have to field the gallery inquiries. I saw your work and I really want to represent you. I was like, well, that's my son. You're going to have to call him. Anyway, so Preston Singletary, Sr. here, was, he also mostly worked for Boeing most of his life, but was a great outdoorsman. And so I grew up, really thinking that I could really do anything I put my mind to, I could do it because I saw my parents do it. This is my wife, Osa Sandlund. She's my secret weapon. We met on a work trip in 1993 when I was traveling to Sweden. I convinced her to marry me, and she agreed to come to live in the U.S., and she got a job and was the anchor for our entire family. So we have 2 kids. My daughter here is my newest employee of Preston Singletary Incorporated. So I'm training her to cut the stencil, so she's following my hand and drawing, cutting out the lines that I draw onto the work. I'll get more into that later. And we have a flying dog. So it was May 18th, 1980 was the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and I always show this picture because I like to claim that it fostered my glass career. So I grew up in Seattle, and this happened, and some artists took the ash from Mount St. Helens and they melted it, and they formed a factory called the Glass Eye Studios. This was the first glass artist I ever met. This is Paul Marioni, and Paul, his son Dante and I grew up together. We went to high school together, and basically lived in an old building that was being salvaged, an old telephone building, beautiful old brick building in a small neighborhood in North Seattle. And so this was kind of like New York loft living in Seattle, which was really unique. And we used to hang out on the roof and look out, have this commanding view across Seattle. Felt like, we were, kings of the world, who were having such an elated space to hang out in. But so Dante got me into glassblowing, got me a job when I was 19. 1982 is when I started working with glass. But at the time, my only ambition was to be a rock star. That was my chosen profession, and I ended up falling back on my art career, or my glassblowing career, I guess. So I had this group called Ironing Pants Definitely. We were kind of a funk rock sort of group, and it was all that, the guitar player, that was his fault that we were called that. He came up with that idea. But he was a very creative guy, Maurice Caldwell. He also helped me in my studio in the earlier years. But this is really like Benjamin Moore. This is who I worked with for about 20 years. I worked on this incredible team where I learned really through practical experience. I didn't go to college for this. I didn't. I fell into the factory work, and then I started working with Benjamin, with all these incredible people. Richard Royal here, and others. Lino Tagliapietra, we befriended him early on. This was pretty much the kind of work that I was doing in the beginning. I was learning about how to work with the material, and I was more influenced by the people I was hanging around. Trying to be very technical with, at the time with, these Italian techniques and Italian sensibilities. I called this the Prestonuzzi series. This was like my influence of, Italian modernism. I met this guy, David Svensson, at the Pilchuck Glass School in 1988, and he shared with me his portfolio, and he had been working with carving with the Tlingit people up in Haines, Alaska, and he asked about my interest. And this was the very first time I had sort of put pen to paper and tried to draw those elements out. I didn't know what I was doing. I was tracing things out of books. I was just like, trying to understand how to draw the Tlingit designs. And so he asked me my interest. I said, yeah, it's part of my family background. He goes, well, you should really follow this path. It's going to be, it could really open up so many doors for you. And he was right. and this is Joe David, who has become sort of my most important mentor. He's from the west coast of Vancouver Island, from the Nuu-chah-nulth tribe, and he's also a sun dancer. He kind of inducted me into the Sweat Lodge ceremony. And there's so many stories. I mean, I'm giving you a kind of a edited version of this thing, my life story. But this, basically, David at one point had, proposed to Pilchuck that we do a totem pole for the Pilchuck Glass School, illustrate the founders of the school, the story of the founders. It was John Halberg was a very passionate Northwest Coast native art collector. Dale Chihuly, was an appreciator of native art. Halberg had donated the land to which Pilchuck was situated. So we proposed, making this totem pole. So we did work on the totem pole up in Haines, Alaska, shipped it down to the campus. Here we are working on it at the campus. We created a class around the completion of the totem pole. We, and everybody was drawn to it. It was an incredible session. It was like a rite of passage for me. This is in the summer of 2001. And so I was working with David. We finished the details around the totem pole, and everybody, on the campus, picked up a paintbrush and started painting the pole, and then we installed it. We had some elders come down from Haines, Alaska. This is the only thing that I really contributed to it, was the hat. Everybody's like, well, that totem pole that you carved. It's like, I did not carve the totem pole. I made the hat, and everybody was like, oh, hey, how's it going with the hat? Is the hat ready? Is it, I saw you made that big hat. Like, well, so what do you what about the hat? And, and all the carvers were like, yeah, next time you need a hat stand, just let us know. But for me, it was, it was like all the planets were aligned. We had, this opportunity with the Tlingit carvers being on the campus, and I was teaching, and I was like, it was just a crazy menagerie. And so this is our class. These are the folks that we created glass inlays, and we, if I didn't mention it before, we put neon light behind these glass elements so that they illuminate, kind of like the Northern Lights, or kind of like the abalone inlays that you find in Northwest Coast masks. So this was a dagger that was owned by John Halberg, and he repatriated it to a family in Angoon, and as a result was given a Tlingit name. And so he was, anyway, so we asked permission. So we did everything in the traditional protocol. We went to the elders and asked for permission, told them exactly what we were going to do, and this came together just quite beautifully. And it was, it was amazing. Like I said, for me, it was, I received a blanket. It was just a lot of things around that was very life-changing. And this is only part of my team, but it was kind of a cool picture. So these folks, Britt and Terry, have been working with me for almost 20 years now. And then there's this guy, Janusz Pajniak, who recently relocated to Seattle, and he's a very dear friend from Seattle to here to Corning. So anyway, here to visit with his family, Michelle, and his their two kids. So, but he was also foundational in a lot of the ways that he helped me with my work on occasion in the studio. So nice to reconnect. So, the early days, so now I'm getting into the work finally. These are the kinds of things that I was making. They were reflective of certain types of objects that were recognizable, hat forms turned upside down, it becomes a bowl. There's a sort of a grease dish with these figures. masks and ceremonial rattles. A lot of these things were my inspiration. So I was trying to mimic the style, mimic the objects of the Tlingit culture. And this is a shaman's amulet, but it's such a beautiful form. It's exaggerated in its scale, but it was used as a ceremony, like a healing ritual. And so there's a lot of stuff about Northwest Coast Native art and the intellectual property around these symbols. They relate to family, they relate to history, they relate to clans and everything. So it's very deep, and you have to understand the if you're going to be a practicing artist, you have to understand all these things. But this was kind of my departure into the modernist era or realm. So this was a piece that was obviously inspired by a Brancusi form. But so like that first statement that I put on the screen, this the whole idea of modernism and primitivism was something that was a very rich topic for me. It gave me a lot of inspiration. I started to make these spare organic forms and be very abstract about the intent, and this is kind of inspired by an amulet form that you might wear as a necklace, but it was giant, it was bigger than a necklace, and so I started to play with this format and really expand on it as much as I could. Every day in the studio is a new adventure. I really feel very blessed to be, both Tlingit, but also a contemporary artist. Here's an obvious, reference to modernism with the Calder, Stabilias, and so these, just playing with composition, playing with form, playing with, this is a land otter. So the land otter, possesses a specific role within the culture. He's a shapeshifter and holds a special power for the shaman of the community. And playing with different formats. So I'm constantly trying to reinvent my approach, and working with this sort of pictorial style has been also liberating and eye-opening in the same way. A little bit about collaborations, because part of me being an Indigenous artist, working with this material, part of what really excites me is when other Indigenous people or Native people are doing, or what can they do with the material. So I've done a lot of these collaborations just on a high level, just to sort of show other artists what can be done, and then kind of revisiting the classical glass blowing approach. Of course, Joe David is always a special person to collaborate with, and he always pushes me into newer, more details, more levels of complexity. Concept. These are spirit figures that are kind of like point markers in the forest that you would encounter if you were, wandering through the forest on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Dante Marioni, of course, I helped Dante with his work for many, many years, and but we never ever made work that we signed, both on the same piece. So we started to make a series of pieces in different forms, and these kind of like inspired by baskets, these kinds of forms. So all of these artists, I gain perspective by working with them, and how do they interpret their culture for today's world. So in the old days, a lot of the work that we would do was for the community. Okay, so now we are basically creating for the commercial market. So we rely on collectors to buy the work that we do. So, and so, if there were no good practicing working artists, there would be no good art. So we are, we rely on that support so that we can develop our craft, and when it comes time to make something significant for the community, then we're poised and ready. This is Tammy Garcia. She was probably one of the most prominent artists that I collaborated with, and she's from the Santa Fe. And this was an amazing dynamic project based on the popularity of her work. I mean, we essentially, we had like 5 exhibitions together and sold almost every piece, I'm pretty sure. But that really put me on the market for the Native American art collector, which was a big deal at that time, because at that time the Native American art collector was not hip to the material of glass. It wasn't traditional. So this really opened a lot of doors for me. But this guy, this is Maori from New Zealand. So these were incredible things that we did together. The green is jade stone. So these are pieces that he would, his artwork, but then we can join them with the glass pieces. Marcus Ammerman, is an amazing bead worker. I call him the original native glass artist because, beadwork has a historic connection to native culture, and it came through beads, trade beads. So I see this as an extension or an evolution from that initial connection. Now we're actually working with the material, we're shaping it, we're synthesizing it for the symbolism of our culture. And so yeah, working with many different people. Had a cultural art exchange down to Australia, and met amazing people down there. This is Raven Sky River. Also, I made this up. He's part Brazilian and part Tlingit, so I call him Brazinglet. But he's super talented at sculpting these aquatic forms, and so using having those as a canvas to design on is quite remarkable and beautiful. Upcoming is this. So I'm working on this series of pieces with Spike Mafford, who's a photographer who I actually went to middle school with back in the day. We're talking 11, 12 years old. We were 13 years old, and so our paths just kept crisscrossing over the years, and he developed his skills as a photographer, and so we started talking about taking these pieces out into nature and photographing them, but then making the pictures giant, like 20 feet tall, or 30 feet wide and 10 feet tall, something like that. So these smaller totem forms, they become 10 feet when you blow them up, so it's going to be really interesting. We want to sort of bring awareness to the natural environment through these pieces. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So this is something that just came up recently, and so we were approached by the National Nordic Museum in Seattle to work with them, and I said, the Nordic Museum is like, well, what am I going to do at the Nordic Museum? Yes, I have a Swedish wife, but they said, oh yeah, we want you to show together. So we wanted to showcase your creative life together. So this was the day after I met Åsa. I'm sitting here in Sweden, kind of starstruck here, just trying to hang out with her as much as I can. But so yeah, fast forward a couple years, I did live 6 months in Stockholm, and then convinced, we discussed it together. It wasn't a lot of convincing, but she suggested that we could live in Seattle and she could start her career in Seattle. So she was a design student at Beckman School of Design, and she was working in many different ways, from photography to graphic design to, working in a printing house and working with glass. So we actually met at a glass factory at Costa Boda in 1993. So this is the figurehead for the show. You can kind of see Odin in the center there. There's a totem pole that's blending our two cultures, the Tlingit and the Nordic. And so she's going to be represented as the white raven, and we're going to kind of create this exhibition around how we met and explore some new ideas around storytelling. This is when we were up at Pilchuck in, I think, 1984. 94. Thank you. Fact check. Yeah. It would be great if we could fact check everyone's. Everyone's speaking. But these are some of the things that she did. These were exploring the different typefaces. These were pieces that I helped. She gave me a purpose when I lived in Sweden. I was her American blower, as they called me. And so these are the kinds of things that she did up until about 2003. But she took a corporate job, worked there for 30 years. She worked for Nordstrom. And she, as I mentioned, she's my secret weapon because she was the anchor for our family as I was developing myself as an artist. So it's a great story. Most recently, Martin was recently here at Corning after we taught at Pilchuck last summer. But we've been working on a collaboration together for the past couple of years, just kind of trying to develop something, see if we can develop a body of work. With Martin's incredible style of sculpting faces, we got into all kinds of stuff this summer. They showed up in June of 2025, this past June, before we went to Pilchuck, and we're all connected through this elder, Joe David. So he, he's a very special individual to us, and so he showed up and helped inspire us. We started to work on really incredible things. And so now we're kind of like thinking that we would like to operate more or less like a collective. Raven, Sky River, and Kelly Odell, his wife, and Martin, and me, Joe David. So the ideas that evolved from this session that we were at together was just, was incredible. These things that we did were just interpreting, again, working with native themes, working with the culture, the cultural ideas and the stories. And, we just kept trying all these, things that we've never done before. But, this was an example where we were, Raven and Kelly made some elements, these blackberry brambles, and Karen Willenbrink made these ravens that sat on the top, and we made this, incredible moon face. And so, to be continued. And rolling right along, I had to touch on the music a little bit because it is a big part of what the way that I project, it's part of my creative expression. When I figured out, how to connect the culture to the glass art, I sort of put music on the side, on the back burner. And when I started to think about, well, why don't I do the same thing with the native musicians? And so this is our group. We're called Kuik, which means potlatch in the Tlingit language. So it's a sharing of culture. It's a sharing of songs and dances and stories and what have you. So this is where we're at. So we worked with this guy, Bernie Worrell. Was an incredible keyboard player from the group Parliament Funkadelic, and he worked, and I was a big fan. And I realized at one point, I learned that he was, creating a Kickstarter campaign for to get a tour bus, and this is a guy who's like 69 years old and he's still touring, and so I paid into this Kickstarter campaign. Part of it was to bring his band to Seattle, and he would play my 60th birthday party, or no, my 50th. I'm sorry, I'm not that old. It was 50. Fact check. So anyway, so we started a 3-year period where we recorded and made all this incredible music, in my opinion, this incredible music, based on a guy that we all admired. He's very much of a musician's musician. This is actually the cover of so there's a documentary film that's being produced about the group called The Magic of Noise, and so that is about to be released. But those adventures with playing with Bernie on the stage was just like, mind-blowing. Playing Flashlight with Bernie on stage was just like, I had to pinch myself. But we had an amazing time. We actually recorded 4 different sessions with him, and brought all kinds of incredible musicians in together. This is actually my high school jazz teacher from my childhood. Inspired me, with a lifetime of music. And we got him into the studio, and he played trumpet on one of our tracks. So anyway, it's a large group. It's about 10 people. We have 12 on a good day, but it is something that really occupies a large part of my brain, probably more than it should, but it's something that I enjoy doing quite a bit. And when we're all together and we're 10 people on stage, it's quite an unstoppable force, quite amazing. So we also mentioned this, so now we're out of the music phase. This is back to the artwork. This is an exhibition that's been traveling since 2018, originated at the Museum of Glass and is traveling. It's currently at Spokane, but it's been at in DC, Oklahoma, Kansas City, many places. And so this illustrates the story of Raven in the Box of Daylight. So as you walk through the exhibition, you get the whole thread of the story. And it's how Raven in the beginning of time, brings light to the world. And so what happens is that, he goes through this elaborate journey, and he takes the stars and then the moon and then the sun. He breaks daylight on the world, and the people in the world have been living in darkness for their entire lives. Were shocked, and some of them ran off into the forest. They became the forest animals. Some of them jumped into the water and they became the sea life, and some of them jumped into the sky and they became the birds. And the people that stood up and there's 2 versions of the story, like stood up strong and proud, became the Tlingit, the human beings, or stood there bewildered, not knowing what to do, haphazardly didn't run for cover, became the Tlingit. So anyway, so there you go, take your pick. But so from that, now I'm getting into more current stuff, and I'm wrapping it up here too. So this is kind of where I'm at with the artwork now, and expanding on the whole universe of what Raven is. So Raven is the most important cultural symbol within, well, I guess he's important. I mean, I'm from the Eagle tribe, so I think that the Eagle tribe is important as well. But so Raven occupies most of the cultural stories, the mythologies. And so I started to ask, what's Raven up to now? He just disappeared, right? Well, if you think about, the colonization of the culture, the native cultures, and so what happened was that the stories just stopped coming out. So now I'm trying to imagine mythologies that actually talk about what Raven is up to right now. Here and now, he's presumably still around us. And so I'm working with this Garth Stein, the picture of the fellow before, and he's part Tlingit as well. And so he wrote he's written amazing novels such as The Art of Racing in the Rain, which was made into a movie. You might have heard about that. But back in 2000, he wrote a book called Raven Stole the Moon. And this was what started me off thinking about, contemporary Raven stories. So I give Garth like a checklist of objects, and I say, okay, I think Raven's going to do this, and then do this, and this, and this, and this, and I'm going to illustrate it in a sculpture. So in our version of the story, Raven, he fell asleep. He fell asleep, and he slept for 100 years, and he woke up, and Raven, he wakes up and he looks around and he doesn't recognize where he's at. He's like, we had forests and long houses. Now we've got, what are all these tall buildings? What's going on here? So he's confused, and so he decides to travel again. He starts to fly. So in the story of Raven and the Box of Daylight, Raven is transformed into a blackbird, and that marks him from this sort of transgression of stealing the daylight from this old man that had it in his possession. So he wakes up and he's white bird again. He's transformed back into a white bird. In most native cultures, a white albino animal is thought of as a supernatural being. It has special powers, and so that's the case here in the Raven story. So he's checking out the world, and he's looking, and he's observing. He goes, what the heck's going on here? And people are pointing at him and laughing at him. It's like, look at that white bird. It was like, oh my God, I haven't seen a white bird, So he doesn't like it. He feels like he looks like Elvis in the Las Vegas era, and so he decides to roll into the ashes. He goes down to the beach where there's been previously a beach fire, and he rolls into the ashes and transforms himself into a blackbird so that he can travel around sort of incognito. No one's going to notice him if he's just a blackbird. So he starts to visit like all these other animals, which he had connections with. So he goes to the land otter people, and he goes, yeah, it's like, so tell me what's going on here? And I've been away for a long time, and I just don't get it, And the landowner's like, we hear that there's heat waves in the ocean and the snow crabs are dying, because only the white man can declare that there's a heat wave in the ocean. And so Raven starts to develop a concern around all this, and so by communing with the land otters, he knows that they have these spiritual powers and connecting with shaman spirits, and he knows that they'll spread the word. So so he decides to go back to the beach, and the people, they say, Raven, you've come back to us. That's so great. Hey, we found this box up around the bend on the beach. Come with us. And he goes, oh, okay. Well, hey, last time I found a box, it had the sunlight, the daylight in it. It's like, yes, Raven, you're great. You were great. You're wonderful. The moon and the stars, I found them all in boxes. He goes, yes, Raven, come. And so he comes around the beach, and he discovers this ice chest, right? So, and this actually comes from a story of like this, Yeti coolers that fell off a trucking boat, and so they were washing up on the coast of Alaska, and Yeti was like, oh, yeah, we understand that you're finding these ice chests on the beach. It's like, feel free to keep them, but why not post a selfie on Instagram? So we're actually taking real stories and connecting with current topics. So this is Raven. Now he goes, Yeti. Well, this must be some sort of like unknown power that I'm not familiar with. So I'm going to do battle with this Yeti spirit. I'll jump in and you close the lid, and I'll steal its power. I'll steal its tongue. So they close the lid, and the box is just sitting there, and all of a sudden the tide comes up and washes it out into the ocean, And everybody's wondering, look, what's going on in there? They can't tell. But this metaphysical battle is going on, and, this raven and this Yeti spirit. So but then, so when he's done, he opens up the lid, and he's out in the middle of the ocean, and he doesn't know what to do. So he ends up, splitting this kelp bulb, and he takes, he climbs down this ladder, and he goes down to visit the killer whale people. So now he's talking with the killer whale people, and they're all pissed off because of this, the white man, the human beings are desecrating their environment. He's, it's like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. He goes, all this plastics that are in the ocean, we're pretty pissed off. We're gonna have to do something about this. And Raven's like talking to him about it. So he's looking for guidance. He goes to a shaman. He starts to go through ceremonies and think about the world and what's going on. Comes out of the shaman's sweat lodge and encounters a loon. So all of these, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to create this universe of new imagery that I can draw on for going forward. So talking about contemporary topics. This is like the blue light spirits. This is like the sweat lodge experience where these blue lights are flashing. Raven, and so Raven's always hungry. He's always hungry. So he's always, most of the stories he's driven by hunger, and he's meeting people, and he's like, feed me, and they're like, geez, calm down, Raven. It's like, okay, here's a fish or whatever. So he all these stories. So we're trying to take plausible sort of actions, like how Raven behaved in the old days, and also give him so it's kind of plausible for the Tlingit culture. And this was the newest exhibition that I had just up in Toronto. So I was in Toronto, and then I drove here right after the exhibition. So Raven at this point, he's given up on the world. He's just like, I can't take it anymore. I can't teach these people anything. They never listen. They don't do what I say. They don't, it's like, forget them, And so Raven's always having this inner dialogue with his, with himself, and he's answering himself, and he's like back and forth. He's kind of like, schizophrenic in that way too. So he's, so this is our Raven, the Raven that we've created for today. And so this Raven goes down to the beach, and it's an ultra low tide, and he's, and the Tlingits say, when the tide is out, the table is set. So there's all this bounty of the ocean, crabs and mussels and oysters and what have you. So Raven's enjoying all of this, on the beach, and then he gets washed in by the tide. The waves come crashing in, and he's like, Jesus, what's going on here? I was like trying to get something to eat. It's like, can a guy eat? And he says, well, the tide goes out very quickly, and it's like, okay, now back at it. So he starts to eat some more, and then he looks over and he sees the old woman of the tides, who usually lets the tides out and in every day. And she goes, well, I'm having a really hard time with this at this point. It's like the water's not cooperating with me. It's like, so now we're talking a little bit about climate change here. So we're talking about these contemporary issues and wanting to attach a story to it. And then, so he commands the old woman of the tides. He pokes her with a sea urchin quill in her bottom and says, 2 times a day, in, out, got it? That's your job. So so that's how the tides are created. And then, of course, there's a new phenomena where the killer whales are wearing dead salmon on their head. If you look it up, you'll see that this is a thing. So nobody really knows why it is. I mean, some people will say, oh, they just carrying their lunch. They're packing a lunch, for a little later if they get hungry. Some people are saying, no, they're trying to bring awareness to, the depreciation of the salmon, quantities or whatever. So who knows? So anyway, they're parading around with these Sunday bonnets on their heads, Raven lifting the edge of the water, going back to talk to the killer whale people. The killer whale people's like, we got to do something about this. We got to do something about this garbage patch thing. It's like we're gonna start attacking the boats now. We're gonna attack their boats. And he goes, the Raven's like, well, then what do you do? Are you gonna eat them? He goes, no. The people the man who created the killer whale, and this goes back to another story. Once he created the killer whale to take revenge on his brothers-in-law, instructed killer whale to never harm human beings again. And it's true, they don't actually harm human beings unless they're in captivity, like at SeaWorld. And so they said, no, we found a workaround. So the sharks are more than willing to eat the human beings. So we're gonna attack their boats, and now they're gonna then the sharks are gonna eat them, and they're more than willing participants because they have a common, beef with the human beings. And then so later, Raven ends up on this boat, and he sees this ring out here, and these boats are out there, and he lands on this boat, and they're like, King Raven, you're welcome on this boat. We'd like to welcome you and talk about our deal that we had to. He goes, what deal? What deal? It's like, well, we wanted to use your likeness on our new food, our genetically modified salmon. And he's like, what? He goes, well, what do I get for this, or what do I have to pay? He goes, well, just your soul. You have to sell your soul, but for that you're going to get 2 lifetimes worth of salmon. And he thinks that's a good idea. So he's like, you mean I can get a salmon anytime I want? And he goes, yeah, that's the deal. It's the deal. We just sign here on the dotted line. And he's like, well, I'm not going to sign it unless I can sample the goods. I'm sorry. He goes, well, we can't allow that. You can't sample the goods. So Raven creates a distraction. Hey, look over there. He goes and grabs one of these salmon, and it's like this little mealy, gray flesh thing, and he tastes it. He goes, wow, that's terrible. I'll never put my name on that thing. And he goes, well, it's too late. We've already made the can, and we're marketing it as we go. So he flies away. He's like, okay, forget you guys. And he flies way up into the mountains, and he flies up, because he's like, well, what's up with these human beings? I can't deal with this anymore. So he goes up and he communes with the mountain goat. Mountain goats also, occupy this territory. There's this impossible terrain that away from the humans, but up near the heavens. So he's starting to talk about, the mountain goats telling him about, these humans that have, mined the entire mountain, and the mountains are hollow. They've taken all the value, all the silver and the gold and what have you out of the mountain. So that's why this mountain is all cracked up. And he talks about this frog who lives up, in the who this is actually also part of a traditional story. Whereas if the frog is disturbed, he's going to create an earthquake and blow up a mountain. So, and this is based on a traditional mountain goat oyster catcher rattle. These 2 figures that are represented on this particular rattle. So when he's talking with this mountain goat, all of a sudden this Thunderbird shows up, and they're like, and he's like, I am Thunderbird. And it's like. And Raven's like, yeah, well, what's the big deal with that? He goes, well, I am Thunderbird. He goes, well, okay, you're Thunderbird. I flap my wings and the thunder claps across the land. And he goes, well, come on. If I'm honest, I've only heard thunder, 3 or 4 times a year. What else? Give me something more. He goes, well, I am Thunderbird. I am Radiant Thunderbird. And so Raven at this point decides he's going to say, well, you know, you look really good, and you just keep up that bluster, and we're gonna run you for office. I think you're good for, you know, 51% of the vote. And he goes, well, what do I do? And he goes, don't worry, I've got it covered. You know, I'll be calling the shots, but you just go out there and just claim your Thunderbird. Go for it, you know. So anyway, that's the story that we just did, and that is the end.
Would you like to open up for question and answer?
Yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Any questions?
Please wait for the mics, everybody in the audience, so the online audience can hear as well.
Did you bring CDs?
I did not bring CDs. I didn't bring the merch table other than the books, I'm sorry, but they are available through the website, and you can preview them on Spotify, The Evil Empire, but yeah, it's on there too. Temporarily, I might pull it. I mean, a lot of artists are pulling from Spotify, which I would consider as well.
Preston, great lecture over here, other side. Great lecture. Always a big fan of your work, obviously. But you talked about working in traditional materials, and then obviously you working in glass, and in that initially there was a bit of a conflict with that material, glass, being accepted into traditional exhibitions. Has that changed, and has that changed because more people are doing it, or through the work you've done?
I described, probably in, I forget when it was, maybe 2008 or 9 or 10 or whatever, when I did that collaboration with Tammy Garcia, because I'd been showing in the Southwest for a few years with limited success, and people were, they would like look at it and, circle it, and then they'd go buy a pot, a traditional pot for like $20,000 or something. It was just like, what? I have a glass blower over here. No, it's just like, the glass and ceramics are always sort of like, they're always in this sort of unspoken, maybe, competition. Not really, I don't know. But and so with the success with the popularity of Tammy's work, like I say, it opened up more doors for us, and for me. It elevated the material. Blue Rain Gallery has a big, I owe them a lot of gratitude for that, because they showed the work on a consistent basis, and they believed in what I was doing, and they felt like it was important that this was something that is new and fresh and different. So I, was a good beneficiary of that attention at that time. And so now, I would just say at this point, there was, several years ago, back in about 2004, I had an exhibition. I was advising for an exhibition called Fusing Traditions, and at that time it had like 14 Native American artists, and some of them made their own glass, and some of them just designed for with and worked with other craftsmen to make the glass part. Today there's an exhibition called Clearly Indigenous, and it has about 45 artists in it. Native artists and indigenous artists. So it's growing in its acceptance, and the way I always put it, and of course, reflecting on the words of the elders, and Joe David once pointed out that the materials that we use for the traditional arts are becoming more and more increasingly rare, and we can no longer get the giant logs for totem poles or dugout canoes, what have you. So you will see new materials being adopted and used for keeping the stories and the symbols alive. So part of what I'm doing is I like to think that I think the longer that I work with the material, the more traditional it becomes, right? Because now there's a long history, 30-year history of me making Native American inspired glass, and so so I think that will hopefully inspire the next generation. You know, it doesn't have to be in glass, but it could be in other materials. It could be concrete, it could be steel, it could be whatever, it could be, you know, but something to you know, fold into the culture, and so that we have more ways of expressing our history.
Over here. So I'm curious what the process was for your experience at the Pacific Northwest Ballet and your set design. So what was the experience working in a performance setting versus like a visual setting?
Yeah, fortunately, like I said, we could have been here another hour and a half, and I could have showed you a lot more stuff. It was like, but enough is enough. No, that was an unexpected opportunity, which just kind of, I was at a reception, and the director for the Pacific Northwest Ballet said, "Hey, have you ever thought about designing, doing set design for the ballet?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, would you like to?" And I said, "Sure." Not knowing really what I was getting into, but so I jumped at the chance, just thinking it would be really, you know, fun and, you know, something different. And, you know, the process was really interesting because it was, you know, a lot of people, you know, when I got into it, I realized, you know, I didn't have complete freedom. I mean, it was more of a collaboration, I would say, because I don't know what it takes to make a successful ballet set design. And so I was working, you know, we had, you know, a number of ideas which we kind of eliminated in a kind of a meeting or whatever. We said, well, let's try to go this direction. We finally arrived on a direction, and I started to design things for, you know, but I don't know anything about painting trees on, you know, for the scenography and all this stuff. And so I had a great team that I was working with, and I felt almost like a, you know, like my wife, like a design director. You know, I had these people that I could sort of draw on to make, you know, certain aspects of the production. And then it was really interesting because the biggest question that I was getting from, you know, I was getting interviewed a lot by different people, you know, the media, and they were like, well, what does the ballet have to do with Native culture anyway? You know, and I was like, well, it's, you know, Sleeping Beauty's a fairy tale, and, you know, we have mythologies, and so it's not too much of a stretch to imagine putting a mythology together with a fairy tale. And so this is, so I was able to navigate that. But I have to say that when it finally came all together, all said and done, it was kind of mind-blowing because I missed the dress rehearsal. I showed up opening night, and there was a huge guy sitting in front of me, so I was like kind of going like this. Oh, this is fun, you know, and then finally at the intermission, he was gone. And I was like, now I can enjoy it. But it was quite remarkable to, I mean, it was surreal to see it all come together in concert with the music and the dancers, and you know, meeting the dancers was incredible too, because we were sort of like standing, you know, on opposite sides of the stage, going like, well, they're the dancers, and they're like, well, there's the artist, and I was like, well, I don't want to bother them, and so then I, you know, then started up a conversation, and it was just really sweet. You know, they just wanted to know how they could honor, you know, the Native cultural perspective, you know, that I was bringing to the ballet, and I just said, just do it with joy, you know. That's all we can ask, you know, just to do something to inspire, and so that's how it went. It was But it was funny because I thought, so I bought, I got tickets to opening night, and the next night I was down at buying some food at the local grocery store. It's like 2 blocks from the ballet hall. And I was just like, oh, I just want to go see him dance again. It was like that. It was kind of addictive, to see all of that energy and all of that sort of effort going into this production. I'd never been involved, and of course, being a musician, I was. I'm into the performing arts, so it was an opportunity to see how it's done on that level. It was incredible. Fact check. No, it was, and then, of course, working with Paul Taswell, who was the costume designer, and he was, it was just amazing because I didn't know what a powerhouse he was. He had designed for Hamilton, he was just in the process of working on the ballet. He was also designing for Wicked, the movie with Ariana Grande, and it was, and then he won an Academy Award. So it was like, oh my God, I didn't realize in the presence of such greatness, and it was, so that part was really cool too.
I think we have time for one more question.
I really like the way you're taking the stories forward. But my question is about working with Joe David and sort of the long cultural history of the Tlingit. And Joe he's like a shaman, and so I was just really interested in how the collaboration works. And Joe David always worked in wood and printing, so I'm curious: is he working in glass now, or does he inform your designs, or how's that?
I mean, when I met Joe in the summer of 2000, and it was interesting. It was supposed to be Robert Davidson. Robert Davidson is the top dog in Northwest Coast art, and he canceled. And so I told the school, my close proximity to Pilchuck School, I said, well, let me find somebody else. Let me see if I can bring somebody to the school, somebody I would like to work with. And so I'd identified Joe David, thinking that he'd be the one. I'd seen his work. I didn't really know him. I'd met him only once. First time I met him, he was at Evergreen State College. There's a cultural, native culture house there. And he was chatting up some girl, and, he likes the young ladies that are, sweet and fun to talk to. And I was standing there, and how you're standing there, like, waiting to talk to somebody, and it's getting awkward because you're just standing there, and he turns to me, he goes, "You got a question?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm Preston Singletary. I just wanted to meet you, and I just thought I'd say hi." And he goes, "Oh, okay." Went back to talking to the girl, and he tells everybody after the fact, "Oh, I know who he was. I'd seen his picture in the magazines and all that stuff." So I called him up and I said, "Hey, let's go to Pilchuck Glass School." He knew about Pilchuck because John Halberg was a collector. Donated the land to Pilchuck, and so he said, "Yeah, I'll go up to Pilchuck, but I want to build a sweat lodge on the campus." And so he said, we got up there, the session got started, and the weekend was coming up, and he wanted to do a sweat lodge, and so. We had to go get the birch saplings and kind of build the structure. And he says, "Yeah, make an announcement and say, those of you who are interested." We're talking about the people on in the session on the campus at that time. Come and talk to Joe. And after telling him what telling you what you need to know and looking into your eyes. He'll let you know if you're ready to do this. And I was like, and everybody's like, it's going to be a suffering and sacrifice ceremony. And they're like, what's he going to do to us up there on the hill? And I'd never done a sweat lodge, so I was a little nervous, And so finally I said, Joe, look into my eyes, man, tell me if I'm ready to do this. And he goes, let me put it this way. He goes, you better be. And I said, okay. He goes, Preston, you're my number one guy. Come on, He goes, I want to do the sweat lodge with you, or even if no one wanted to do it. And so in 4 days' time, we did the sweat lodge ceremony, and the last day was a morning ceremony. So we went in at like midnight, came out at daybreak, and it was my birthday. And then we went into the lodge at the end of the night, and he adopted me and shared his name with me, which is a big thing on the Northwest Coast. You can, in Native culture, sometimes you can receive names throughout your lifetime, which signify a change within your life or a responsibility. And so the fact that he shared his name with me was really remarkable because it's known on the Northwest Coast. Kakauan chief, it means transforming killer whale. And so, with that becomes, a responsibility, becomes a keeper of cultural knowledge. It becomes a responsibility, and how you conduct yourself is very important. Otherwise, you take the name away from you. So, that was the story, and that was the full story.
Well, thank you so much, Preston.
Mm-hmm.